What can go wrong sometimes does, but that doesn't mean it has to sink your company. And if you believe in the adage, necessity is the mother of invention, working through some of these challenges might be beneficial to your business. Today we're going to talk about risk, defining it and assessing it, and determining how conservative you should be in terms of managing your company.
This is The Language of Business with Greg Stoller.
As an entrepreneur looking to get funding, where's the fine line between innocuously forgetting to mention a problem versus fraudulently failing to do so? Sounds like a question for an attorney, and we might have the perfect one for the job. He's pragmatic, results-driven, but most importantly, passionate about working with entrepreneurs. Bill Contente is a partner at Gesmer, Updegrove, and welcome to The Language of Business.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me.
How honest should entrepreneurs be about their problems?
Entrepreneurs should be completely honest with their investors, period. End of discussion. One of the things that entrepreneurs absolutely have to do with their investors is build trust. And if the entrepreneur is hiding the ball or trying to get away with something, an investor will sense it, an investor will find out, trust will be broken, and the deal will fall apart.
But I'm sure in your office all the time, you and your associates debate business issues versus legal issues. How far-reaching should an entrepreneur be in saying, is this something which I'm being overly nervous about, or is this actually something that I have a duty to disclose?
Well, an entrepreneur is required to disclose anything that's material to the investment. We can talk about what is material, but the entrepreneur should set up a few kinds of things in making that distinction. The entrepreneur can sit down with his advisors, his lawyer, his accountant, other trusted advisors, and try to assess whether something is a real risk or just a pipe dream that they really can't understand enough to make an assessment on.
So let's assume that you followed the rules and did what you were supposed to do, but along the way you find a previously undocumented issue. What do you do then?
Sure, that happens all the time. And part of the process of doing an investment is uncovering things and figuring out how to deal with them. So something new comes up. You have to assess whether this is something that needs to be disclosed. If it needs to be disclosed, the sooner you get it to your investor, the better off you're going to be. If you're, again, this is a trust game. If your investor at all thinks that you're hiding the ball, trust is going to be broken and the investor's not going to give you his money to invest.
Let's assume the investor has already given you his money,
Yep.
but the investor or the attorneys representing the investor have just done a poor job with their due diligence. What happens then?
Okay. If you are taking somebody's money and you haven't told them all the material things about your business, you are guilty of securities fraud, and you can go to jail. It's
Even for a private deal?
Absolutely, for a private deal. Usually you're selling somebody's stock. And when you sell somebody's stock, it's a security, it's regulated. There may be exemptions from the very difficult to comply with regulations, but you're still obligated to completely disclose all the material facts about your business. If you fail to do that and the investor is harmed, you could be sued, you could go to jail. It can get nasty at that point.
Where do you come into the picture? If you are vigorously supposed to be representing an entrepreneur, and there's problems that you have uncovered that maybe the entrepreneur doesn't even know about, or the entrepreneur feels isn't as much of a big deal, what duty do you owe to the investors in that company?
Okay, let's be real clear. I don't owe the investors anything. They're not my client.
Right.
I do owe the entrepreneur quite a bit. The first thing I owe the entrepreneur is a good reading of the law and a good assessment of what his responsibilities are. However, I can't help the entrepreneur break the law. If I really believe that the entrepreneur is engaging in securities fraud, I'm going to have to give him a choice, which is basically either you can disclose this or you can find yourself another lawyer. It's that simple.
And of all of the years that you've done this, how many times have you had to have some variant of that conversation with your entrepreneurial clients?
The conversation comes up a couple, 3 times a year. I've never had to resign. Clients always, basically people are generally good at heart, and once they realize that important things need to be disclosed to the investors, they kind of bite the bullet and go ahead and do it. And usually, not always, but usually the investors are much less concerned about it than the entrepreneur is.
Outside of going after somebody for securities fraud or having you resign, which is sort of an extreme end of the spectrum, what recourse do investors have, and traditionally, what happens?
In theory, investors can sue for securities fraud. I can't think of a situation where I've been in where that's happened, and I've been doing this for a lot of years. Generally with angels don't have enough invested to make it worth their while to go chase somebody.
Because the legal fees alone might be more than their investment that they originally made.
Right, goes right over the top. What's surprising is that the venture capitalists usually lose interest once they realize that the company can't be a home run anymore. Let me give you a for instance. Early in my career, I represented a company that took in a couple of $1 million of angel money, and a year after the investment, the investors came back in and looked at the books and realized that most of the proceeds had disappeared from the company being paid to consultants. When they looked for paperwork on the consultants, there essentially was none. There was very little that had been accomplished with the company. And it turned out that unbeknownst to everybody, the president and the chief financial officer, who had different last names, were actually married. The venture capitalists couldn't be bothered to hire a lawyer to chase these folks. It was a clear case of fraud. It was somebody had walked off with $2 million. But since there was really no big upside for them, they were much more interested in going on and chasing the next deal than they were in trying to see what could be recovered from this last one.
You're passionate about working with entrepreneurs, but if you had to go through this process all over again, after passing the bar, et cetera, would you prefer to be passionate about entrepreneurs or the investors themselves?
Oh, I do both. Let's be real clear about that. I represent a lot of entrepreneurs. I also represent a lot of investors. I think that the interplay between the investors and the companies, the entrepreneurs, there are some amazing men and women out there starting companies and growing companies. And after they're successful, a lot of them go out there and become angels and back new companies.
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Bill Contente, attorney who equally represents entrepreneurs, venture groups, angel investor groups, as well as the entrepreneurs themselves.
How do people in the energy industry deal with risk assessment? Greg Stoller talks with Bob Goodoff next on The Language of Business.